Every guitarist knows 3 notes can change music history. Some riffs define entire decades, while others create whole subgenres. Today we're counting down the 15 greatest metal riffs ever recorded, the guitar parts that made millions grab instruments and turned casual listeners into lifelong metalheads. Number 15. Black Sabbath.
Sing me a song, you're a singer.
Tony Iommi lost the tips of his middle and ring fingers in a factory accident on his last day of work in 1965, forcing him to downtune his guitar and use lighter strings. That physical limitation created the sound of heavy metal itself. The main riff from Iron Man on the 1970 album Paranoid became the blueprint for doom metal and stoner rock, recorded at Regent Sound Studios with producer Roger Bain for a total album budget of £600.
You're a bringer of evil. The devil is next.
The descending tritone riff uses just 3 notes, but sounds massive because Iommi tuned down 3 half steps to C-bar standard, making the strings easier to fret with his prosthetic fingertips. Vertigo. Records released the album in September 1970, and it sold 4 million copies in the US alone. Purists know Iron Man wasn't even a single, while casuals think it's Sabbath's biggest hit. Bands like Metallica, Pantera, and Sleep built entire careers studying Iommi's heavy, detuned approach to riff construction. Number 14. Metallica. 18 million copies made Master of Puppets the biggest-selling thrash metal album in history when Elektra Records released it in March 1986. James Hetfield wrote the title track's main riff on a Mesa Boogie amplifier at Sweet Silence Studios in Copenhagen, with producer Flemming Rasmussen, creating an 8-minute epic that proved thrash could be both brutal and progressive. The album also featured Battery, Welcome Home, Sanitarium, and Disposable Heroes, but the title track's opening riff remains the most recognized. Hetfield uses all downstrokes on the main riff, a technique borrowed from punk but executed at thrash metal speed with palm-muted E-string chugs creating mechanical precision. Kirk Hammett added harmonized lead breaks, while Lars Ulrich's double bass patterns drove the tempo. The song's middle section shifts into a melodic interlude before exploding back into the main riff. Casuals think Enter Sandman is Metallica's heaviest moment, but purists know Master of Puppets set the standard for technical thrash. Bands like Trivium, Lamb of God, and Shadows Fall worship this riff's combination of aggression and complexity. Number 15. Deep Purple. The Montreux Casino burned down on December 4, 1971, while Frank Zappa performed, and Ritchie Blackmore watched the flames from across Lake Geneva. That fire inspired Smoke on the Water, but the guitar riff Blackmore wrote became the most recognizable 4 notes in rock history. Deep Purple recorded the song for Machine Head at the Grand Hotel in Montreux, with Martin Birch producing, because the fire destroyed their planned recording location. The album reached number 7 on Billboard and sold 7 million copies worldwide. Blackmore played the riff on a Fender Stratocaster through a Marshall Major amplifier, using fourths intervals that sound deceptively simple but groove perfectly. The riff appears in the song's intro, verses, and outro, becoming the foundation for the entire track alongside Ian Gillan's vocals on We All Came Out to Montreux and John Lord's Hammond organ. Warner Brothers released it as a single in May 1973, reaching number 4 on Billboard Hot 100.
I've been losing my mind.
Every guitar store employee has heard beginners attempt this riff millions of times, but Blackmore's original performance remains untouchable. Bands like Whitesnake, Rainbow, and countless others studied his blues-based hard rock approach to riff writing. Before we continue with number 11, I want to hear from you. What's the first metal riff you ever learned on guitar? Or the one that made you a fan? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. We have people tuning in from all over the world. Number 12, LED Zeppelin. Jimmy Page constructed Whole Lotta Love around a riff he developed during sessions at Olympic Studios in London for Led Zeppelin II with engineer Eddie Kramer in April 1969. The album sold 12 million copies in the US alone, making it one of the biggest hard rock records ever released by Atlantic Records. Page played the main riff on a Telecaster through a Supro amplifier, creating a distorted, bluesy attack that influenced every hard rock guitarist who followed. The riff uses a simple blues-based pattern, but Page's timing and tone made it revolutionary for 1969. Robert Plant's vocals and John Bonham's drums lock with the guitar, while the song's psychedelic middle section breaks into pure chaos before the riff returns. Atlantic released it as a single in November 1969, though the UK version was edited against the band's wishes. Casuals know Led Zeppelin as classic rock, but purists recognize them as proto-metal pioneers. Bands like Black Sabbath, Soundgarden, and Wolfmother built careers on Page's heavy riff style. The song reached number 4 on Billboard Hot 100, despite being over 5 minutes long, proving heavy guitar riffs could dominate radio. Page was 25 years old when he recorded it, already a session veteran who understood how to make distortion sound musical rather than messy. Number 11, ACDC. The death of Bon Scott in February 1980 could have ended AC/DC permanently, but guitarist Malcolm Young refused to quit. Brian Johnson replaced Scott as vocalist, and the band recorded Back in Black at Compass Point Studios in Nassau, with producer Mutt Lange between April and May 1980. The title track's opening riff, written by Malcolm and Angus Young, became one of the most instantly recognizable guitar parts in rock history. Atlantic Records released the album in July 1980, and it sold 25 million copies in the US alone. Malcolm Young played the main riff on a Gretsch Jet Firebird through a Marshall amplifier, using simple power chords with perfect timing and tone. Angus Young added lead fills, while Cliff Williams' bass and Phil Rudd's drums created the groove. The album also featured You Shook Me All Night Long and Hell's Bells, but the title track's riff defined the hard rock sound of the 80s. Purists know Malcolm wrote most of AC/DC's greatest riffs, while casuals credit Angus. Bands like Airborne, Crocus, and The Cult worship the Young brothers' dedication to stripped-down, groove-based hard rock. Malcolm was 27 when he wrote this riff, already a decade into refining his rhythm guitar approach into pure science. Number 10, Judas Priest. Rob Halford screamed while Glenn Tipton and KK Downing created the twin guitar attack that defined the new wave of British heavy metal. The opening riff of Breaking the Law from the 1980 album British Steel took Tipton less than 10 minutes to write during rehearsals, yet it became one of metal's most iconic guitar parts. Producer Tom Allom recorded the album at Tittenhurst Park Studios, formerly owned by John Lennon, and Columbia Records released it in April 1980. Tipton played the main riff on a Fender Stratocaster, using simple power chords that sound enormous through Marshall stacks. The riff repeats throughout the song's 3-minute runtime, proving that memorable beats complex every time. British Steel also featured Living After Midnight and Metal Gods, selling 2 million copies and establishing Judas Priest as metal royalty. The single reached number 12 on UK charts despite, or because of, its stripped-down simplicity. Before Breaking the Law, metal riffs favored complexity and speed. After it, simplicity became acceptable if the groove hit hard enough. Bands like Armored Saint, Accept, and Saxon studied Priest's approach to hooky, radio-friendly metal that never compromised heaviness. Tipton was 32 when he wrote this riff, synthesizing a decade of metal evolution into 3 perfect chords. Number 9. Iron Maiden. Steve Harris formed Iron Maiden in 1975, but the band didn't hit their creative peak until Bruce Dickinson joined as vocalist in 1981. The galloping riff from The Trooper on the 1983 album Peace of Mind became the signature sound of the new wave of British heavy metal.
You'll take my life, but I'll take yours too!
Guitarist Dave Murray wrote the main riff, while Adrian Smith added harmonized leads, recording at Compass Point Studios in Nassau with producer Martin Birch. EMI released the album in May 1983, and it sold 4 million copies worldwide. Murray played the riff on a Fender Stratocaster through Marshall amplifiers, using palm-muted downstrokes to create the galloping rhythm that mimics cavalry horses charging into battle. The song tells the story of the Charge of the Light Brigade from the Crimean War, with Dickinson's vocals soaring over the twin guitar harmonies.
Understand there's no turning back. The bill was served.
Peace of Mind also featured Flight of Icarus and Die With. Your Boots On, reaching number 3 on UK charts. Casuals think Iron Maiden is all about complicated progressive metal, but purists know their best riffs combine simplicity with energy. Bands like Trivium, Avenged Sevenfold, and Amon Amarth built entire sounds around Maiden's galloping riff style and twin guitar harmonies. What's your take? Which of these riffs still gives you chills every time you hear it? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's continue. Number 8. Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen was 23 years old when he recorded the opening riff to Ain't Talkin' About Love at Sunset Sound Recorders in Hollywood for Van Halen's 1978 self-titled debut album. Producer Ted Templeman captured Eddie's sound using a single Electro Voice RE20 microphone on a Marshall amplifier modified with a Variac power transformer. Warner Brothers released the album in February 1978, and it sold 10 million copies in the US alone, making it one of the most successful debut albums in rock history. Eddie played the riff using arpeggiated AM/FG/M chord patterns with heavy flanger effects, creating a sound nobody had heard before in 1978. David Lee Roth's snarling vocals and Michael Anthony's bass locked with Alex Van Halen's drums while the riff repeated hypnotically. The album also featured Running with the Devil, Eruption, and You Really Got Me But Ain't Talkin' About Love, showcased Eddie's ability to write simple, devastating riffs alongside his famous tapping solos. Before Van Halen, metal riffs were blues-based and heavy. After, they became technical showcases for guitar virtuosity. Bands like Extreme, Mr. Big, and Racer X worshipped Eddie's combination of technical skill and songwriting hooks. The song reached number 13 on Billboard Mainstream Rock chart despite being buried as an album track, proving Eddie's riff writing transcended radio promotion. Number 7. Ozzy Osbourne. Randy Rhoads died in a plane crash on March 19, 1982, at age 25, robbing metal of its most promising guitarist. Before his death, Rhoads wrote the opening riff to Crazy Train for Ozzy Osbourne's 1980 solo debut, Blizzard of Oz, recorded at Ridge Farm Studios in Surrey with producer Max Norman. The riff combined classical music training with metal aggression, creating something entirely new. Jet Records released the album in September 1980, and it sold 5 million copies in the US alone. Rhoads played the riff on a custom white Sandoval Les Paul through Marshall amplifiers, using harmonized arpeggios that sound like a train accelerating down tracks. The riff appears in the intro, verses, and outro, anchoring the entire song while Ozzy's vocals and Bob Daisley's bass create the melody. Blizzard of Oz also featured Mr. Crowley and Suicide Solution, establishing Ozzy's solo career after leaving Black Sabbath. Purists know Rhoads elevated metal guitar to classical levels, while casuals think Eddie Van Halen was the only innovative guitarist of that era. Bands like Yngwie Malmsteen, Paul Gilbert, and Jason Becker studied Rhoads' neoclassical approach to metal riffing. The single reached number 9 on Billboard mainstream rock chart, introducing millions to Rhoads' genius before tragedy cut his career short. Number 6. Pantera. Dimebag. Darrell Abbott was 24 years old when he wrote the title track riff to Cowboys from Hell at Pantego Sound Studios in Texas, recorded with producer Terry Date in 1990. The album sold 2 million copies and transformed Pantera from glam metal failures into groove metal pioneers. Atco Records released it in July 1990, and the main riff destroyed every assumption about what metal guitar should sound like in the post-thrash era. Dimebag played the riff on a Dean ML guitar through Randall amplifiers, using extreme low tuning and pick harmonics to create crushing heaviness. The riff combines thrash speed with groove metal swing, while Phil Anselmo's vocals shift from screams to melodic singing. Cowboys from Hell also featured Cemetery Gates and Primal Concrete Sledge, reaching number 27 on Billboard mainstream rock chart. Rex Brown's bass and Vinnie Paul's drums locked with Dimebag's guitar to create the tightest rhythm section in metal. Before Cowboys from Hell, metal was splitting between thrash and glam with no middle ground. After it, groove metal became the dominant sound of the 90s. Bands like Lamb of God, Machine Head, and Devil Driver worshiped Dimebag's low-tuned, groove-based approach. Dimebag's murder on stage in 2004 robbed metal of one of its most innovative riff writers, but this track remains his defining statement. Let's pause for a second. We've covered some legendary guitar work so far. What's your favorite metal riff that hasn't been mentioned yet? Comment below. Let's keep going. Number 5. Motörhead. Lemmy Kilmister formed Motörhead in 1975 after getting fired from Hawkwind for drug use, then proceeded to create the fastest, loudest rock and roll ever recorded. The opening riff to Ace of Spades from the 1980 album of the same name defined speed metal before thrash even existed. Guitarist Fast Eddie Clarke wrote the riff during soundcheck at a venue in Belfast, and producer Vic Mail recorded it at Jackson's Studios in Rickmansworth in August 1980. Bronze Records released the album in November 1980. Clarke played the riff on a Gibson Les Paul through Marshall stacks, using rapid-fire power chords that blur the line between punk and metal. The riff repeats throughout the song's 2-minute 49-second runtime, while Lemmy's bass and Filthy Animal Taylor's drums create chaos. The album sold 2 million copies and reached number 4 on UK charts, with the title track becoming Motörhead's signature song despite only reaching number 15 as a single.
But that's the way I like it.
Before Motörhead, metal tried to be sophisticated and progressive. After Ace of Spades, speed and aggression became acceptable end goals. Bands like Venom, Tank, and early Metallica studied Motörhead's stripped-down approach to maximum velocity. Clarke was 29 when he wrote this riff during a random soundcheck, proving that inspiration strikes anywhere if you're always ready to capture it. Number 4. Slayer. Jeff Hanneman wrote the opening riff to Raining Blood on a BC Rich guitar in his apartment, creating one of thrash metal's most apocalyptic moments. Producer Rick Rubin recorded it at Hit City West and Hollywood Sound Recorders for the 1986 album Rain in Blood, released by Def Jam Recordings in October of that year. The album lasts 28 minutes and 42 seconds, making it one of the shortest and most intense metal albums ever released. Columbia Records refused to distribute it due to lyrical content, forcing Def Jam to partner with Geffen instead. Hanneman played the main riff using chromatic patterns and drop tuning, creating dissonant heaviness that sounds like actual blood falling from the sky. Kerry King added rhythm, guitar, while Tom Araya's bass and Dave Lombardo's double bass drumming pushed the tempo into extreme territory. The album sold 2 million copies and influenced every extreme metal band that followed. Rain in Blood also featured Angel of Death and Postmortem, but Raining Blood became the closer that destroyed audiences at every Slayer concert. Purists know Hanneman wrote Slayer's darkest riffs, while casuals credit King. Bands like At the Gates, Dark Tranquillity, and every melodic death metal band studied Hanneman's chromatic approach to riff construction. Hanneman was 23 when he wrote this riff, already deep into pushing thrash into more extreme territories that would eventually birth death metal. Number 3, Thin Lizzy. The dual guitar harmony riff from The Boys Are Back in Town separated Thin Lizzy from every other hard rock band in 1976. Guitarists Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson developed the harmonized intro at Rampart Studios in London, with producer John E. Alcock for the album Jailbreak, released by Vertigo Records in March 1976. Phil Lynott wrote the song about his experiences with the Manchester chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, and the harmonized guitar riff became the blueprint for the new wave of British heavy metal 5 years later. Gorham and Robertson played Gibson Les Pauls through Marshall amplifiers, harmonizing the main riff in thirds to create a sound that was both melodic and heavy. Haven't changed that much to say, that I still think that's a praise. The song reached number 8 on US Billboard Hot 100 and number 12 on UK Singles Chart, selling 3 million copies and making Thin Lizzy international stars. Jailbreak also featured Emerald and Cowboy Song, reaching number 18 on Billboard 200. Lynott's bass and Brian Downey's drums created the groove while the twin guitars soared above. She was Steven, well, that time over at Johnny's place. Well, this chick got up and she slapped Johnny's face. Before Thin Lizzy, harmonized guitars were considered too complicated for hard rock. After The Boys Are Back in Town, they became mandatory. Bands like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and every power metal band worshipped Lynott's vision of dual guitar harmony as the future of metal. And that time over at Johnny's place, well, this chick got up and she smacked Johnny's face. Quick question. If you could only listen to one metal riff for the rest of your life, which would it be? Tell me in the comments. Let's continue. Number 2, Rainbow. Ritchie Blackmore quit Deep Purple at the peak of their commercial success in 1975 to form Rainbow with Ronnie James Dio, chasing artistic freedom over radio hits. The main riff from Stargazer on the 1976 album, Rising, proved Blackmore made the right choice. Guitarist Blackmore and bassist Jimmy Bain created the riff at Musicland Studios in Munich with producer Martin Birch, recording one of the most epic songs in metal history. Oyster Records released Rising in May 1976. Blackmore played the riff on a Fender Stratocaster through Marshall amplifiers, using minor key patterns that sound medieval and mystical. The song builds for over 8 minutes, with Dio's vocals telling the story of a wizard enslaving thousands to build a tower to the stars. See how he glides, why he's lighter than air. The riff repeats and evolves throughout, accompanied by the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra arranged by Blackmore himself. Cozy Powell's drums and Bain's bass create thunder, while Tony Carey's keyboards add atmosphere. The album sold 1 million copies despite receiving almost no radio play. Casuals think Man on the Silver Mountain defines Rainbow, but purists know Stargazer represents Blackmore and Dio's creative peak. Bands like Blind Guardian, Symphony X, and every progressive metal band studied this song's combination of classical composition and heavy riffing. Blackmore was 31 when he recorded it, finally free from commercial pressure to create his masterpiece. Number 1, Diamond Head. Sean Harris and Brian Tatler formed Diamond Head in Stourbridge, England in 1976, creating the new wave of British heavy metal in their teenage bedrooms before anyone called it that. The main riff from Am I Evil became more famous through Metallica's cover version than Diamond Head's 1980s original, but Tatler wrote it in 1978 when he was 19 years old. Happy Face Records released the song on the Lightning to the Nations album in 1980, with a pressing of only 1,000 copies, recorded on a budget of less than £1,000 at Rock City Studios. Tatler played the riff on a Gibson Flying V through homemade amplifiers, using tritone intervals and minor key patterns that Metallica would study obsessively 4 years later. Lars Ulrich discovered Diamond Head during a trip to England in 1981 and brought their records back to America, where Metallica covered Am I Evil for the Creeping Death single in 1984. Metallica's version sold millions, while Diamond Head remained obscure, struggling with poor management and label problems throughout the 80s. The original riff lasts 7 minutes and 45 seconds, building from acoustic intro to crushing heaviness that influenced Metallica, Megadeth, and every thrash band that followed. Purists know Diamond Head wrote the blueprint for thrash metal in 1978, while casuals think Metallica invented it. Tatler never got rich or famous, but his riff changed metal forever.